Once my contours have been formed into SketchUp as a surface, I'm going to bring in the design file. Go choose import. Again, this is the same format and one version less to bring into SketchUp. I also notice here I have it labeled no hatch. I actually went in the design file, did a couple things to this design file, and that is all the elevations are set to 0, so I used the flatten command. I also cleaned up the hatches because I don't want the hatching to come in the way it was, where it may make it more complicated. I also don't want to preserve the drawing origin. I'll go and hit import. It brings it in, does all the statistics of it. And you see the information comes in at 0. That's if you have things floating up and high and below, make sure that's flattened. But you also notice in here, if I click on this import, it's not lined up. And the reason why it's not lined up is, again, these are coming in not preserving drawing origin because we don't want to be 1,000 feet off. But what we have is that referenced object. So we can always choose the edge of an object, bring it in, and you can see it now lines up perfectly. Incidentally, if you don't use SketchUp often, you'll notice when you start rolling your mouse to zoom in and out, it doesn't zoom in and out. It actually wants you to be on an object. So if you actually put your cursor on a line, it zooms in and out just fine. It's one of those weird glitches that I think that SketchUp performs. It doesn't want to zoom in and out space. It just actually wants you to zoom in on an object. So the real purpose of bringing in this design file is that I can then shape this topography based on what this design file is. I am not going to take this geometry and then drape it using the sandbox tools just yet. Too often we want to go in here and open up those sandbox tools and use this drape command and actually stitch our design onto that surface. Well, if we do that, we will not be able to use the Artisan Organic Tools brushes very cleanly and then shaping this thing as a proposed surface. If we had this as a proposed surface, this was already graded with our proposed grading on it, then it would be okay to start stamping this. But I think even in that case, we'd want to just clean things up just a little bit the way I'm going to show you. So I'll go and close this up. We don't need the sandbox tools, but what we are going to do is view this from above. And when I view it from above, I'm going to do camera, standard view, top. There's also, if you have these menus up, it's actually the standard view. This is the dialog here at top. And we are going to click on your topography. I'm going to go ahead and hide that information because I just want to see it from above. I also want to do camera standard view, or actually it's already on the standard view, but I want to use the parallel projection. I don't want this to be in any way have any perspective to it. I'll go ahead and draw a box around it so I have some sort of frame that I can work with. And what I'm going to do is export this out as a 2D image. It sounds kind of counterintuitive to do that. Once we have this viewing from the top and no perspective, we'll go ahead and do a file export 2D graphic. I'll go ahead and choose the send it to my folder, and I'll just call this my plan. I don't need to increase any of the resolution on here because I'm just going to use this as a reference surface or reference texture in SketchUp. I'll go and choose export. Once I have that image exported out as a 2D graphic from SketchUp, I'm going to go ahead and crop it in Photoshop. To crop it in Photoshop, I can either take the marquee tool and actually marquee around here, then you choose the crop tool. But because this is a transparent PNG that was exported, I'm going to go ahead and hold the control key down, click on that layer, and go to image crop. That image now is cropped to that bounding box. I'll go ahead and hit save. I'll save right over top of that PNG file, and now I'm ready to go back into SketchUp. In SketchUp, I'm going to take that bounding box, double click on it, move it up in the blue direction just a little bit, tap the arrow key up. I don't want to move it in any way in the XY orientation. I just want to move it up away from my geometry because I'm only going to use this as a place to actually create that projected texture. So I will go ahead and go file import. I'll import this image as a texture, hit import, choose that corner, and I now know that that image is exactly lined up with my design file. So it's not intuitive to take things out as a 2D graphic from SketchUp, but it's going to help us now have a projected texture that works perfectly on top of our terrain. To get this as a projected texture, I'm going to right click on that file or that image and go to texture and say projected. That is now a projected texture. When I take my my paint bucket tool, hold the Alt key down, sample it, and then I'll go back up into my terrain to drop it on there. Now my terrain was hidden in a previous step, so I'll go ahead and go edit, unhide all. My terrain should show up. I'll get inside that group, click on that terrain, double click again. Now I'm inside that terrain group and take the paint bucket tool and just paint that texture on. Once that texture is painted on, I can now work with sculpting this landform to work with my design.